In a dimly lit room filled with doors, a small dragon is trying to escape. An elderly man is chasing after it, but when he turns around, he sees another man closing a door behind him, trapping him inside. The old man throws a magical orb at him, but it has no effect. Years later, it's a typical morning in London, but things are already going downhill for Paul. He sleeps through his alarm, his shoelaces snap, the toaster is broken, and he has to rush to make it to a job interview. On his way there, a strange older man named Monty suddenly approaches and strikes up a conversation, claiming he knew Paul in the past. Paul doesn't remember him and brushes him off, focused on getting in line for the interview. Just then, a little dog snatches Paul's scarf and runs off down an alley. Paul chases after it but quickly loses sight of the dog. Instead, he finds a door labeled Applicants and decides to go inside. The room is full of odd objects, and he meets a woman named Sophie who seems to be waiting for the same interview while watching TV. Paul sits beside her and awkwardly tries to start a conversation but fails. He turns to the TV and realizes he missed the introduction about the company. All he knows is the firm's name, Wells & Co. The only brochure on the table isn't helpful, just a line that says, "Feeling lucky?" Suddenly, laughter echoes around the room and a man named Mr. Tanner enters. He turns away another applicant, then tells Paul to come with him, somehow knowing Paul's name without asking. Tanner leads him upstairs to the main office, where the boss, Mr. Wells, is waiting along with board members Van Spee, Judy, and Casimir. They start asking Paul a bunch of bizarre questions. Paul does his best to respond, though he stays confused and uncomfortable throughout. He's also distracted by some cracks in the wallpaper that, oddly, look to him like a map of London. No one else sees it, but Mr. Wells is intrigued. Still, Tanner tells Paul that they've heard enough and sends him away. As Paul exits the building, he sees the dog again, with his scarf in its mouth, as if it had been waiting for him. Later at home, Paul is disheartened when his roommate announces he's moving out. They argue since Paul can't afford rent on his own. Out of nowhere, a strange claw slides a letter through the mail slot. Paul grabs it, shocked to see it's from Wells & Co., especially since he never gave them his address. The letter says he got the job, and Paul celebrates. The next morning, Paul heads to work full of energy. The receptionist, Rosie, greets him, but still won't say what the job actually is. She gives him a coffee mug and calls for Tanner, who shows up to take Paul on a tour of the place. He explains it's a law firm, and that computers are strictly off-limits. As they pass an under-construction area, Tanner becomes strangely alarmed by a stapler on the floor and insists Paul walk around it carefully, warning him not to panic. They continue through a series of peculiar office spaces, one full of phones and a massive map, where Paul thinks he spots Monty, another room with tons of typewriters, and one with tubes all over the place. Paul still has no idea what any of it means, and Tanner avoids answering. Eventually, Tanner brings Paul to the deepest office, where Sophie is also waiting. They're both interns now. Tanner tells them someone will bring their assignments shortly and leaves. Paul, nervous and awkward, keeps rambling, while Sophie remains unimpressed. Suddenly, a shadowy figure scurries by, making Paul jump. He gets up to check, but it's just a regular mouse. Just then, Rosie enters and drops off a stack of maps. Their first task? To circle all the areas that contain bauxite deposits. Paul has no idea what he's doing, but he still spends the entire morning with Sophie going over the maps. Around lunchtime, they take a break, and as they head downstairs, Sophie mentions she wants coffee, which is odd, since just a little while ago she said she didn't like it. On their way out, they run into Judy, who unexpectedly brings them to a nearby park. Suddenly, a manhole cover flips open, and a metal canister gets tossed out. Judy grabs it right away. She then points out a woman sitting on a bench reading Atonement, and explains that when the woman reaches the part in the story where a character jumps into a fountain, Sophie needs to give her a signal. Sophie, confused, asks how she's supposed to know exactly where the woman is in the book. Judy tells her to hide in the bushes and just focus, watching from a distance. Sophie does as she's told, and to her shock, she suddenly sees exactly what the woman is seeing. When the reader gets to the right scene, Sophie gives the signal. Judy then subtly moves her finger, and like magic, the man sitting by the fountain falls into the water. The woman rushes over to check on him, and that moment kicks off a romantic connection. Judy praises Sophie for handling the task perfectly and explains that the guy's parents had spent a fortune trying to get him together with the woman on the bench. By making it look like fate, the parents believe destiny did the work instead. Paul, totally lost, asks what's going on. Judy finally reveals that Sophie is a seer. She has psychic powers. That's when Judy finally explains what the company actually does. Turns out, most of the people working at Wells & Co. have magical abilities. They're real-world wizards who use their skills for paying clients. Sophie, though just an intern, is already way ahead of Paul, and Judy only takes her along for the next task. Left behind, Paul goes back to the attic office and eats a sandwich while absent-mindedly looking at the maps. When he brushes off some crumbs, he feels a weird tingling sensation in his palm. Curious, he starts hovering his hand over the map, feeling the same sensation grow stronger. Suddenly, the map starts reacting. Right then, Mr. Wells walks in and tells Paul to keep his eyes straight ahead while moving his palm across the map. A pulse of energy runs through Paul's hand and points directly to a spot where bauxite is located. It becomes clear that Paul has a magical gift too. He can divine where things are hidden. Wells, thrilled by this discovery, takes Paul to his private office, leading him through a room full of printers on the way. He explains that the company is in serious trouble, and what they need most is a true diviner to get things back on track. He believes Paul might be the one. When they get to the office, Tanner is already there. To win Paul's trust, Wells brings up Paul's irresponsible dad and says he completely understands how tough that can be. He shares that his own father, who founded the company, once made him sign a soul-binding contract to control him forever. Wells believes Paul wants to prove himself, so he gives him an important secret task: find the portable door, but Paul can't tell anyone about it. Paul agrees, but before he can ask questions, he's abruptly shown the door. Determined, Paul begins searching the building, floor by floor, touching every wall, window, and doorway he can find. Nothing works. Then he runs into Van Spee. Her magical hair moves on its own while she talks. She makes small talk and seems friendly, but when she casually brings up illegal magic, her hair forms the word beware. After Paul walks away, the door right next to him fades into the wall, hidden from sight. Later that night, Paul tries to sleep, but is suddenly yanked into a dream by Casimir. Casimir's power is dream manipulation, so Paul quickly realizes he's not really awake. Casimir wants to know why Wells hired him, but Paul sticks to his promise and keeps quiet. Frustrated, Casimir uses dream magic to stretch Paul's leg, make his teeth fall out, and enlarge his ears, terrifying Paul even though it's not real. Overwhelmed, Paul breaks and confesses the truth. Casimir warns that the portable door could lead to the Bank of the Dead and prepares to leave. Paul briefly thinks he's waking up, but he's not. He's knocked out cold. The next morning, Sophie arrives at work and finds Rosie giving kisses to a stapler. Meanwhile, Paul is still roaming the company building in search of clues. On the floor, he notices the words Bank of the Dead spelled out using stapler clips, with an arrow pointing the way. Following the direction, Paul heads downstairs. As he walks, his hands start to tingle from the energy in the walls, revealing some impressive magical artwork along the way. Eventually, he reaches a dim basement area and comes across a roll-up door with a sign that reads, Goblins Only. Paul opens it anyway, but only finds a regular supply room inside. Before he can take a closer look, Tanner shows up, furious. He throws Paul out, warning him that he's not supposed to be there and telling him to quit before something terrible happens. Elsewhere, Sophie continues working with Judy, who keeps receiving messages from creepy hands that emerge from the sewers. Judy explains the hands belong to goblins, who've been collaborating with wizards for ages and have the ability to observe people without being noticed. For today's assignment, Judy has Sophie file a lost pet report at a shop. This, somehow, will help a woman reunite with her cousin in a few days. The lost pet turns out to be the dog that stole Paul's scarf. Back at the office, Paul continues his building-wide search but finds nothing. When he returns to his workspace, he walks in on Tanner arguing with Sophie about an issue with her contract. It's the end of the day, and while heading out, Sophie suddenly stops to eat a bunch of licorice, despite previously saying she hated it. Almost immediately, she starts feeling grossed out, so Paul brings her to a nearby pub to help wash out the taste. They talk for a while, but their conversation quickly spirals into an argument over who's doing a better job at work. The next day, Paul runs into Casimir at the office, but strangely, Casimir acts like this is the first time they've ever met, like their dream encounter never happened. Later, while taking the stairs, Paul runs into Monty again. Monty confesses that he distracted Paul on purpose the other day, steering him toward this company's interview instead of the one Paul originally planned to attend. Monty tries to stop him from going further, but Paul insists and makes his way back to the strange room he saw before. Following the tingling sensation in his hand, Paul realizes the contents of the room were just an illusion. He walks through it, entering a hidden space filled with bizarre creatures and magical items. He wanders for a bit, messing around with things, until he finds a stapler lying on the floor. As he reaches for it, a force pushes him back. Trying again, Paul uses his powers and discovers the spirit of a goblin trapped inside the stapler. The goblin silently points in a certain direction, then vanishes. Paul focuses his energy into his hands, which finally allows him to reveal the portable door, now visible at last. Curious, Paul opens the door and steps through. As it shuts behind him, the portable door transforms into a towel, and he finds himself teleported to another part of the building. From there, Paul hears voices coming from a nearby office. He peeks in and sees Mr. Wells having a secret conversation about Paul's father and the mysterious disappearance of the company's former head. Paul is stunned to hear the truth. Wells is trafficking human souls and using company employees as experimental subjects. After they sign one of the company's soul-binding contracts, they completely lose their identities. Wells's next target? Sophie. Her recent odd behavior, like suddenly liking coffee and licorice, makes sense now. Even worse, the rest of the board doesn't know what Wells is doing, and everyone's ID badges are secretly embedded with surveillance trackers. Paul realizes he can't let the portable door fall into the wrong hands. He picks up the towel again, and after a few failed attempts to activate it, notices some instructions on the label. Apparently, by saying a spell and a destination, the towel can teleport the user anywhere. To test it out, Paul says supermarket and walks through.
Dennis? Supermarket.
Landing straight into the supermarket's freezer section. People give him strange looks, but he grabs the towel and hurries back to the company building. There, he runs into Van Spee, who reminds him that if he knows anything, he should come straight to her. Paul ignores her and rushes back to his office. Once inside, he immediately rips off Sophie's badge and tosses it aside. He frantically explains everything, then pulls out the towel to prove it. Paul recites the spell again, and finds himself transported to a strange realm, surrounded by thousands of portable doors, covering every wall, floor, and ceiling. Sophie hears someone calling for help inside, but Paul quickly pulls her back and rereads the label, realizing he has to say the destination before opening the door. He gives it another shot, and this time, it works. They successfully teleport to Paul's apartment. Sophie is thrilled by the possibilities that come with such power. She grabs Paul by the hand, and together they start using the door to travel all over the world. Despite their globe-trotting, they still show up to work. One day, Sophie sees the cousins finally reunite at the shop, which makes her proud. She feels like she's putting her powers to good use. But whenever no one's paying attention or they're on a break, she and Paul sneak off for more adventures. The more time they spend together, the closer they become. One afternoon, while they're at the beach, Paul confesses that he has feelings for Sophie. She admits she might feel the same way, but there's a problem. She signed a soul contract, and now she's not sure if what she feels is real or magically influenced. So they make a pact, find her contract and destroy it. They return to the company using the portable door. Paul barely has time to hide the towel before Tanner walks in. But Tanner quickly notices the beach clothes and the sand on the floor. He knows what's going on. He gives Paul an ultimatum: return the portable door and leave the company for good, or face serious consequences. Then he walks away. Paul and Sophie argue about what to do next, and agree to come back later to search for her contract. That night, they sneak back into the company. But when they try to use the door to get to Wells's office, it drops them into a printer room instead. Inside, the printers are running on their own, churning out documents, gym memberships, lease agreements, and other routine forms. But hidden in the fine print, Wells has added soul clauses, tricking people into signing away their souls without even realizing it. They hear strange sounds and spot a stapler on the floor. Following the noises and flickering shadows, they end up in the map room, where papers are flying around and small fires burn in corners. In the shadows, a mysterious creature is casually eating pizza. Spooked, Paul opens the portable door again to try and reach Wells's office. but instead, it sends them to a dark basement with the words, Bank of the Dead scrawled on the floor. There, they find a contract confirming everything. They are stealing souls. Just then, more noises echo around them, so they rush into a creepy tunnel. At the other end, they stumble across a group of goblins. Panicking, they run until they end up behind the door marked Goblins Only. Suddenly, Tanner appears, and the truth comes out. He's actually a shape-shifting goblin and the leader of the Goblin Clan. He scolds them for ignoring his earlier warnings. Then Wells arrives. He orders Tanner and the goblins to leave, but Tanner stands his ground, insisting that without goblins, the wizards are powerless. A heated argument breaks out. Wells loses patience and uses his magic to turn a bunch of goblins into office supplies. Seizing the moment, Paul and Sophie try to escape through the portable door, but they forget one crucial rule. Whoever closes the door becomes its owner. Wells dives forward and slams it shut, reclaiming control. Now, Paul and Sophie are trapped in a strange space filled with thousands of doors. Then, they hear a voice. It's Wells Sr. He reveals the truth. Years ago, Wells tricked him into entering this realm by using a baby dragon, then trapped him here and took over the company. Paul remembers that Wells Sr. holds a soul contract that could control his son, but the elder Wells explains it won't work, because for the contract to have any power, it must be submitted to the Bank of the Dead. Clinging to hope, Paul starts searching for a way out, but the place is a maze, doors everywhere. Wells Sr. says he's already tried them all. Every door leads to nothing. But Paul focuses hard on using his powers, and after a lot of effort, he finally manages to find a way out. He and the others emerge onto the city streets, and a thrilled Wells Sr. leads them back to the company building, already laying out a plan. He tells Paul to take Wells's soul contract to the bank while he heads off to confront his corrupt son, and Rosie leaves to go pick up her husband. The group rushes down to the lower levels, where the goblins are in the middle of relocating all the soul contracts. Wells Sr. quickly tracks down his son, and the two of them clash in a full-blown magical battle, trading spell after spell, tearing the room apart, and sending the goblins into a panic. As energy bolts fly everywhere, Paul and Sophie try to sneak around to recover the portable door. But Paul gets knocked down and captured by a swarm of goblins. Sophie tries to use her powers to mentally reach out to Judy for help, but the goblins charge at her. Desperate to protect Sophie, Paul fights them off the best he can, only to end up trapped in a net. Just then, Rosie arrives, carrying a stapler, and tosses it to Wells Sr., who hits it with magic, releasing a goblin that had been trapped inside. That's when Rosie reveals her true identity. She's a goblin too. She rushes over to the freed goblin and joyfully explains that he's her husband, and they're Tanner's parents. While the family shares an emotional reunion, Wells seizes the moment to launch a surprise attack on his father, capturing him once again. Paul tries to intervene, but Wells blasts him back with a powerful spell. At that point, the rest of the board finally arrives. They try to step in, but Wells keeps them at bay by threatening to kill his own father. Then he magically traps Sophie and demands that Paul hand over his own soul contract in exchange for her life. That's when Sophie reaches out to Paul telepathically, telling him he has the ability to create portal doors from scratch. Paul concentrates, extends his hand, and, sure enough, dozens of new doors materialize in front of him. He opens one right beneath his feet and jumps through, landing directly inside the Bank of the Dead. There, he immediately hands over Wells's soul contract to a bank employee and asks to make a special trade. The moment the employee extracts Wells's soul from the contract, Wells instantly loses his powers. That gives Wells Sr. the chance to magically restrain him, while Sophie retrieves the towel to reopen the doorway into the dark realm. Wells Sr. then seals his son inside the void as revenge for everything he's endured over the years. After that, he rips up the towel's instruction label, declaring the portal will never open again. Sophie starts to panic, unsure if Paul made it out, but then he reappears using his powers. He smiles and hands Sophie her own soul contract, which he managed to exchange for Wells. Everyone begins to celebrate, and Paul and Sophie finally share their first kiss. Paul takes the towel and casually tosses it into a laundry truck, making sure no one can ever use it again. Later on, the board holds a meeting with Sophie and Paul and offers them both full-time jobs. They happily accept. Sophie uses her telepathy to quietly tell Paul that her feelings for him are real. The two of them hold hands. Meanwhile, the towel makes its way to a hotel, and a maid accidentally speaks the magic words. Subscribe for more videos like this. turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.